Morning. Today is Wednesday, the 19th of Av and the 28th of July. We are studying the whole Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Right now we're learning Meseches Shabbos, chapter 6, Bamet Isha. And we're on page 66b, Samach Vav Amud Beis. We're going to start a new Mishnah. And actually what I'm doing today is I'm skipping one entire Mishnah just for today. I'm going to go back to it tomorrow, Be'ezer Hashem, and you'll see why tomorrow why I'm skipping it. So we'll go to this Mishnah here, continuing the lengthy discussion about items that may and may not be worn by humans on Shabbos. Until now, we've been primarily discussing men and women, adults. And of course, there are many things that are different between men apparel and women apparel. There are different kinds of accessories and items that are worn. And additionally, we've covered that there are different trades that have different kinds of things they wear, and even different nationalities of Jewish people that come from different regions of the world. They might wear different kinds of clothing. And we've gone through many of the different items and discussed their permissibility on Shabbos. The Mishnah that I temporarily skipped over, and we'll Be'ezer Hashem go to it either tomorrow or on Friday, depending on our progress on this Mishnah, talks about people that are disabled. What does a person do if, God forbid, they lose a limb and they have a prosthetic, or they have something that is a quasi, something that's in place, what about crutches or things of that nature? And so that's the Mishnah that we've temporarily passed over. And today's Mishnah is going to go to children's stuff, items worn by children. So let's share the screen. Let's take a look at the Mishnah. And actually, I'm sorry, before we go to the Mishnah, we have like a few lines of the previous Mishnah. So let's just finish that, because we might forget to go back to it, and then we'll go to the new Mishnah. So bear with me just a moment. Here we go. If you recall, the very end of yesterday's Gemara was asking a question. Actually, I don't know if we did this. All right, Abaya asked a question. If you recall, we spoke about a certain way of closing a woman's garment with a nut, a stone, a coin, and we discussed that it would be permissible to be done on Shabbos or to have it worn on Shabbos. And when it comes to a coin, it should only be done prior to Shabbos, because otherwise that coin would remain muksa. And that was the gist of our Mishnah. Abaya asked the question following this. Isha mahu shatarim etifrei fa'al ha'egois lahitziv nakata m'Shabbos. What is, or can a woman make use of a nut to help tie up or tighten or secure her garment? But ultimately, her interest is not the securing of the garment. She would like to carry the nut home for her child to play with or to eat. It's interesting that we mentioned Livna Katan, but anyways, can this be done? Rashi says to you, an itana. So you're basically employing a trick. You're not really interested in the nut for the garment. You're interested to give it to your child, but ultimately you could use a nut to secure your garment. Is that acceptable? So the Gemara says,
almost like the trick we do to make a Shabbos key.
Perhaps somewhat like the Shabbos key, indeed.
In reality, your real goal is to get the key, that you want to make it look like jewelry or it becomes the buckle to a belt or something.
Yes, indeed. So the Gemara says, Tiboye laman da amar marimin. Tiboye laman da amar ein marimin. This is a question that applies to both sides of another debate in the laws of Shabbos. What is that debate? So Rashi says, Plukta b'chol kisvei kodesh. Towards the latter half of Mesechah Shabbos, the Mishnah says, Loivish kol ma sheyachalil b'yish David Rabbi Meir, afilu asara chalukim zu al zeh, Rabbi Yosi Omer shmein asakelim k'derech shel loivish b'chol. Basically, if I'm not mistaken, we're talking about a case where there's a fire. And if there's a fire on Shabbos, you have things that are in jeopardy of being burnt. You're not allowed to carry them, even if they might get burnt. But the question is, could you wear those garments on your person so that you could help save them from the fire without carrying them? Brings to mind all the different jokes or imagery of people trying to smuggle stuff or clothing across the border. And so you might wear many, many items of clothing. Or, there's a weight limit on what you can take in your suitcase. So many times you see people in the airport shuffling and reshuffling their suitcase and putting on items. And so can you wear a whole bunch of clothing in order to save it from the fire? So in this discussion, Rabbi Meir says, Gesundheit, put on as many clothing items as possible to save from the fire. And Rabbi Yossi says, no, you can only wear that which is typically worn. Says our Gemara, both sides of this debate about what to do with clothing have a question about the nut. How is that and why is that? The opinion who says that you're allowed to do a trick by a fire would have a question. Why? You know why he's lenient and allows you to put on all this clothing? If you would not do harama, if you would not employ a kind of trick to wear all the clothing, what's the alternative? Everything is burnt. But in the instance of the garment and the nut, okay, so the kid won't have a nut to eat. Will survive. And therefore, or in other words, we're afraid that if we don't give the person a way to save their clothing, al pi halacha, legally, they may end up carrying it out in any way because it's so painful to lose all that stuff, a whole wardrobe. With a nut, if there's no legal way to do it, then maybe probably won't do it. Therefore, even the opinion that says you're allowed to employ trickery about a fire wouldn't necessarily give authorization to do it with a nut. Alternatively, you could say, even according to the strict opinion, Rabbi Yossi, who says you may not save clothing by wearing it from a fire, Hasam derech haitzah b'kach. Aval hacha in derech haitzah b'kach ema shapir dami. Maybe clothing, it's only normal to wear one piece of clothing. Many pieces of clothing, that's weird. That's not considered wearing, that's carrying. But the nut, this is a very common way to wear it. Ema shapir dami teku. So we have different ways to understand our question. On one hand, we're strongly inclined to permit it, the nut, because it's a legitimate way of securing your clothing. Alternatively, you'll survive without the nut. So why should we give a leniency if there's no pressing, burning issue, I should say? Pun intended. I just want to go back over here. Let's see.
Rabbi.
Yes, Rabbi Beryl.
Rabbi, is the danger of suffering a loss not enter into this?
It does enter into this. That's why there's an opinion, Rabbi Meir, that's strongly inclined to permit it.
Yeah, because the question with the child does not involve any loss.
Correct. That's exactly the point. Asking. That's exactly the point that Gemara is making. Because there's no loss, if we say it's not allowed, so the person will listen. As opposed to in other scenarios where we say it's not allowed, there won't be listening. Because it's the garments and the person needs to save them. By the way, there are other instances in halacha where there is some latitude. Not a lot, some latitude, particularly in the rabbinic sphere, if there's a big monetary loss. Not because the halacha is malleable, because the halacha understands that if we don't create a permissible avenue to escape or to save the situation, they may end up doing it in an illegal manner. So that is this. Oh, no, that's what we want to do. Let's look in the code of Jewish law now. Remember, the Gemara ends off teku, unresolved. We don't know what the deal is with the nut. So halacha has the Shulchan Aruch has an interesting pshara, an interesting compromise of sorts. Let's read it. Your kid really is making you meshuga and he really wants a nut. You need to keep the kid quiet or entertained, or maybe he's hungry. So what can you do? And you want to use the nut to on your wardrobe to take it out into the public domain, or out of your house, I should say, if it's going to end up in a biblical place, in a place that carrying is biblically prohibited. Also, you may not do it. But if it's in a Carmelist, a place that midaraisa is not, you're allowed to carry, and only rabbinically is prohibited. Mutar is permissible, most likely because the Gemara ends up in a doubtful manner. Therefore, shusarabim, safek deraisa lechumra, safek derabanan lekula. When the debate pertains or weighs on rabbinic matters, we're machmir. I'm sorry, rabbinic matters we're makel, and biblical matters we are machmir. Let's, for a moment, look at just some of the commentaries here to see how they use. Hold on. See the Mishnah Brura. Here he explains exactly what our Gemara says. V'hainu, shemisatefes betal sheish b'roisha echad ritzua, v'koishra even o'egars b'roisha sheni. There's a strap when you use the nut to tie and secure the garment, which causes shaleipel atalos me'alev le'machzik mishum eskaven alahitzi ha'even. It doesn't look like they're trying to carry the item. The noid lakol shetzrich lekach mashenkin megager melech. Anyways, basically, on one hand, it looks like a common way of carrying. On the other hand, it's evident that you're doing this as a trick. All right, whatever. That's the story. That is the story. Let's go back to our Gemara. Or let's go to our new Mishnah. So the Gemara again ends off with a question and answers Teiku. It remains unresolved. Let's do this actually. We'll look at the next Mishnah. We'll learn the Mishnah. We're going to skip the Gemara. We'll go to the next Mishnah, and then tomorrow or the next day we'll go back to the analysis. Hakitaya, an amputee lo yaleinu. God forbid a person loses a limb. It can happen, and particularly in times or places that were affected by war, and there were certain terrible conquerors that were known to who were known for how do you call it? They were known for being mean and to amputate people. Just 1 second.
Rabbi, I presume the Gemara is going to ask the question, what about an arm or another limb?
Mm-hmm. The Gemara will discuss a number of facets. The reason why let's see what the Mishnah is first, and then we'll see what the Gemara discusses. So God forbid a person is in the shoe doesn't fit.
At the other limbs.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. In other words, let's see. Hakitiya, an amputee, yoitze b'kav shaloi. They may wear out a wooden leg, a prosthetic. But maybe we shouldn't use the word prosthetic because here we're talking about a much less evolved, sophisticated limb. And it's also perhaps not as secure to the person. So let's see. A wooden leg may be worn out. Divri Rabbi Meir. This is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Why would Rabbi Meir allow carrying a wooden leg? So Rashi points out, and Rabbi Steinsaltz translates, the min'al didehu. For an amputee, the wooden part that attaches to the leg is like a shoe. That's an interesting way of looking at it, right? All right, there's a Tosfos that we'll maybe revisit tomorrow or when we do this Gemara in depth. Anyways, Hakiteya, you can go out. Different way. Rabbi Yossi also. Rabbi Yossi says, no way. You may not walk out in public, not in public, in the public domain wearing this wooden leg, because it is not considered a shoe, and if so, you're just carrying something essentially. Even though it's helping you in your walk movement, it can still be perceived as something that you're moving around, and it's not a garment, and it's not a shoe, and therefore, according to Rabbi Yossi, it's considered carrying. Let's just see the Rashba for a moment. He says, Rashi understands the whole question is a wooden leg considered a shoe or not? He basically just proves that is the matter. And it's about a question of, do we consider this item to be a shoe or not, as Rashi says. Now the Gemara continues. What if this wooden leg is a little more developed so that it holds padding? Kitisin, it holds padding. Rashi, shenechkach boy. So imagine a pirate's leg, a wooden leg, but on the top of the wooden leg where it attaches to the person's stump or the remaining part of the leg, it has an indent which holds padding. In order that when a person places the leg in it could be more comfortable and snug. Let's hear Rabbi Steinsaltz. A concave space at the top of the leg into which pads are placed to cushion the amputated leg. It now becomes like a wooden vessel, and for the purposes of ritual purity and impurity, it is susceptible to ritual impurity. Of course, that's not our primary issue. Our primary issue is the laws of Shabbos. But as you may have noticed on a number of occasions, the Mishnah chooses to weigh in regarding Toma and Tahara, ritual impurity and purity as well. And here's the crux of the issue. In the Torah, metal items can be considered a vessel, a keli, regardless of its design. But wood has to actually have a dish, a space to collect, to receive something. Therefore, the wooden prosthetic leg, if it's just a piece of wood, would not necessarily be considered a vessel for the purposes of ritual impurity. But if it has this indent, then it would be considered a vessel for ritual impurity. Smuchai shalai. So this is talking about a different scenario. We're talking about, God forbid, a person who is a double amputee. Rashi, smuchai shel kitei. Yesh kitei b'shtei raglav, a person who is a double amputee. And lo yaleinu, they've lost both legs. So today, Baruch Hashem, we have wheelchairs and other items that might help a person get around. In those days, it doesn't appear that they use wheelchairs. What they would do is the person would almost crawl, and there was padding provided for their thighs or their legs when they would crawl. He would have like a padding or something that would support his legs so they don't wear down. So the Gemara says, Timei and Midras, they can become ritually impure by the owner. The Yosim B'hem b'Shabbos, and certainly you're allowed to go out on Shabbos with this padding on your legs. The Nichnasim B'hem b'Azara, and one is permitted to go into the Beis HaMikdash wearing these things. Now, what's the point? The Beis HaMikdash, where does the Beis HaMikdash come in? And the Azara, the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, where does that come in? So Rashi explains, and the Rabbi Steinsaltz explains over here, usually one may not go into the Beis HaMikdash wearing shoes, right? There are many special halachas, rules about a Jew going to the Beis HaMikdash. One of them is they cannot go b'minoloi, they can't go with a minol, or with a money bag, or with spitting. There are many restrictions in the Beis HaMikdash to treat with the sanctity. But this is not considered a shoe. Rashi. These cannot be considered shoes because they're not at the end of the leg. They are padding that goes along the shin. Again, let's just see the Mishnah one more time. You're allowed to go out with these smuchais on Shabbos, and you can even go into the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because this is a necessary accessory for such a person. God forbid that doesn't have a leg. They need to be able to go around, and therefore this is considered part of their wardrobe, and there is no problem with them going out with this on Shabbos. It's not considered a shoe, however, and therefore they would have access to the Beis Hamikdash. I must say that relative to the medical world and relative to what was available in those days, it seems like we're saying the Beis Hamikdash for its era was handicap accessible. They were not going to create restrictions that would necessarily preclude this individual from going to the Beis Hamikdash.
It'd be a big problem with the stairs.
It would be very challenging with stairs. Halachically, they would probably be exempt from the obligation to be oile regel because the person would have to go with their feet, but they would not be precluded from going to the Beis Hamikdash. Now,
It'd be a shaila if somebody could carry him.
Interesting question. So let's see the rest of the Mishnah.
Hopefully, we'll have to decide these questions in my lifetime.
Ezer Hashem. So the Mishnah continues. What if someone is handicapped in a manner that he's not even able to use any part of his leg? Maybe, God forbid, the amputation was very high up, close to the thigh. All he would do is sit in a chair and he would move himself with his hands. Again, then they had no wheelchairs. Let's see Rabbi Steindalt explains it, and this is the way Rashi explains it. If one is crippled to the extent that he cannot walk at all, so he sits in a chair that is attached to him and places supports on his hands, and he uses his hands to walk around. Today, if you look around the internet, there are pictures or videos of people that have such a condition, and they use their hands instead of their feet. And it's amazing the ingenuity and the ability for the human to adapt, and you can see them moving with great speed and relative agility. They're able to get all over the place. So now the halacha is for such a person, kisei v'smachol shelo tmei midras, this chair he is on, and the support he has on his hands are ritually impure. But he cannot go out with the support on his hands. And he also can't go into the courtyard because I believe these would be considered like shoes for his hands. Now, the Gemara is going to explain, I believe, and Rashi explains, that ultimately a person is able to navigate without these gloves for his hands. And therefore, it's only like a bonus, it's like an extra thing, and therefore on Shabbos it may not be done. Rashi, he would make like leather gloves or wooden gloves. Oh, I maybe translated this wrong. Maybe here we're talking about a chair and support. No, because hold on one second. I'm sorry, I said this goes on his hands. No, it sounds like these items go on the feet or on the stub of his legs, and you can't go out with them on Shabbos. Rashi, Rabbi say no. I remember he doesn't really need these. That's what one opinion says. Rashi says, I don't like this opinion. They are needed. The problem is sometimes they fall off and they can be carried. And therefore, according to the Mishnah, one may not go out in such a condition. Now, before we continue, let me just take a peek in the Steindal's Gemara, see if there's any pictures that we can share to help make sense of this situation. Hold on. No, I don't think there are any pictures here.
Rabbi, there's today there's be many shilas. People have implants for hearing, which
Indeed,
has
indeed.
chips in them. I imagine people have to paskin.
People do have to paskin. I mean, many of those things are not such shilas things that are totally part of you or a necessary accessory for your management is typically not a problem. But there are other kinds of things that are questions, like crutches. When and could a crutch be permissible, or a prosthetic, or a those buttons that people have. God forbid they have a propensity to certain illness, and so they have an emergency call
Also,
button.
blind people have a beeper developed at Hebrew U that from the beep they know exactly the obstacle, the height, the size, the width.
Yes, so all these are good shilas. We're not going to paskin them here, but suffice it to say, all these are shilas that will ultimately the development. And bli neder, if you remind me, we can look up. I'm certain that there are shilot to chuvot that are developed on these very subjects we could review. But ultimately, this would be the beginning point of any discussion of the sort.
Yeah, they'd come back. They come back to this Mishnah, this
Yeah,
discussion, I presume.
yeah. But I'll just say this: it's going to be hard for us to predict exactly what the psak is going to be based on the Mishnah because there are many additional factors that are developed in the Gemara and then in Halacha. And so for that reason, I would not presume based on what we're reading here yet what the Halacha might be in those circumstances. So anyway, so there you have it. Different kinds of handicaps, mostly here are based on amputation, leoleno, and which items might be permissible and which items might not be acceptable. The Mishnah continues with one more item. Lo kat min. Something called lo kat min. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. Lo ketamin, says Rabbi Steinsaltz. Tahirin, they are ritually pure. They can't become ritually impure. Ve'ein, yoitzin, bohem, and one mustn't wear them on Shabbos. What are we talking about? So Rashi says, you know what we're talking about? Talmashka. Nasin l'schoik u'lahavis tinoikis. A word that in French is called something talmashka, and it's used to play and to scare little children. We'll share a picture in a moment. Rashi says, "Tahirin milakabel tuma de'ena likely l'tashmish l'tashit." We're going to open up the Oitzer Lazi Rashi. He says, "This is rebel." You know such a word?
Not really.
Telemas. Well, I'll tell you, it's a mask.
Something like a mask.
But the word even sounds like a mask. Telemashka, some kind of mask.
Yeah. It sounds like mashka.
Yeah. Hold on. No, that's a music. That's not going to help us. Anyways, it's a kind of mask. Rabbi Steinsaltz provide. Oh, here, let's see. Roman era masks. Hopefully this. I think there's a Greek and wrote here. I believe we're talking.
Why would a person wear it?
These were very common in the ritual, in the culture of the Roman culture. In theater, have you ever seen something like this? Apparently, it was fairly prevalent in Roman society. It was used in entertainment. They would have shows. Today, we might use puppets. Well, they would make a presentation out of masks in the theaters you have here. And if you look at these images, some are more cartoonish. Some look frightening. And you tell a story and you use it for the drama and for the different voices or something to that effect. And so anyways, here you see it has that pole attached to it. So anyways, one shouldn't wear it out on Shabbos. Rabbi Steinsaltz, no. Close this for a moment. Close this for a moment.
Those masks are enough to scare Hashem.
I don't suppose it's easy to scare Hashem. I'm kidding. Of course you can't scare Hashem, but certainly they could be quite. They could be terrifying, especially for a little child.
Scare the rabbi. They'll scare the rabbi.
Yep. So the Gemara it's interesting. Rashi tells us what it is. The Gemara is actually going to discuss what exactly the translation of that word is. So the Ezer Hashem, we're going to revisit the Gemara analyzing the Mishnah. And primarily, there's going to be a lengthy discussion about the Girsa of the Mishnah, meaning the correct version of the Mishnah. And in order to prove it, the Gemara is going to bring many, many citations. And the Gemara is going to bring a number of other Mishnahs that talk about the halacha of shoes. And based on what's perceived as a shoe and what the technical classification of a shoe is, will depend on if this prosthetic is considered a shoe or not considered a shoe. It's a little bit of a complicated matter, and I would like to defer this Gemara for another day or two. I want to first see the next Gemara, which is going to talk about a different subject, but it'll get us into the mode of this kind of analysis. And so we're now going to skip temporarily. We're not skipping this Gemara. The Ezer Hashem in a day or two, either Thursday or Friday, we'll go back to the Gemara. But for now, I want to show you the next mission. Habonim, Kinderlach, children. So we're now going. We've talked about women, men, industry and career-related garb. We talked about amputees, which are adults with special needs. And now the Mishnah goes on to talk about stuff that a child might need. And so the Mishnah goes like this. Habonim, boys. Steindl says it's talking about young boys. And you'll see in the Gemara's analysis why it was probably young boys. Yotzin biksharim. They were permitted to go out on Shabbos with these nuts. A certain system of nuts that were used, and Rabbi Steinsaltz tells us it was a folk remedy. Rashi tells us the Gemara will elaborate. Uvinei Melachim, and princes, Vizagim, they're allowed to go out wearing decorative bells. Rashi says, Ish klitch shel zav linoi. It was the decorative bells. In Old French.
And what kind of Jewish princes did we have?
Good question. Do we mean only princes, or do we mean people of a elite social strata, elite social class? That's a good question. Or maybe in times in Jewish history there was a monarchy, and therefore we're giving halacha for it. But you're asking an interesting question. Who are these Bnei Melachim? Hold on. Before you can, hold on, do me a favor. The Gemara is going to give us, is going to expand the parameters here, and therefore the question won't be such a question. So let's see the Gemara.
For a Jewish mother, every kid's a prince.
These kites as a prince. Yes, absolutely. The Mishnah then goes on and says, V'chol Adam. Really, any human being could wear, any Jewish person that's observing the laws of Shabbos could wear these nuts. They could wear these bells. It is common for the sages of the tradition, of the oral tradition, to present the scenario in its most likely, present the halacha in its most likely scenario. So when the Mishnah says kings or princes wear bells, it's not because there were a lot of Jewish princes, as Rivera asked. Since when is there a Jewish prince? There hasn't been one since the Hasmonean era, maybe the Bayis Rishon. And so the Mishnah itself tells us we're not really talking about princes. It's the kind of bell that is most likely to be associated with a person of princely status. But anyone could technically have the same halacha. They could wear them. That's the whole Mishnah. Children, yingelach, boys, simple boys could have nuts, and princes wear bells, and anybody could have either of these items. Now the Gemara wants to know, what are these items? Since when and why is someone wearing a bell? Lomerzen. Let's see the Gemara. Mike Sharim. What is going on with these nuts? What kind of nuts are we talking about? Amar Adamari. Adamari quoted. Hello. Oh. Amar Adamari. Amar Rav Nachman bar Baruch. Amar Rav Yashi bar Avin. Amar Rav Yehuda. Ada quotes Rav Nachman Baruch, quoting Rav Ashi bar Avin, quoting Rav Yehuda, to say, you know what these nuts are? Kishure Pua. They are garlands of the madder plant, says Rabbi Steinsaltz. Has anyone heard of the madder plant? So we know what a garland is, but what's a madder? It's got to be some kind of botanical. Let's try this. Madder. Here we go. Madder it's a plant related to the bedstraw and coffee family. Is madder a plant? Yes, it is. What is it used for? Well, apparently it's used for dye in today's day and age. But let's see what it might have been used in those days. Rashi. This plant was tied up and it was understood to have medicinal value. And Rashi tells us something very profound. Rashi tells us, I'm not certain. I don't know what illness was best served by the madder plant. Rashi didn't know, but certainly in the time of the Gemara it was known.
I could tell you.
Lameharin? Got a
Menstrual disorders, urinary tract disorders, dissolving kidney stones, blood disorders, bruises, jaundice, paralysis, spleen disorders, sciatica.
And my dear friends, this is why we have a pharmacist on the payroll. So Reb Allen tells us that the madder plant was known to have a number of different remedies related to the urinary system and what was it else? Menstrual regulation and other important parts of
kidney stones.
Kidney stones.
Alan, how many prescriptions for madder plant did you fill?
It doesn't matter.
There we go. Apparently it doesn't matter. Okay. So,
but I found out what masks could be used for. In those days, people had bad complexions, all kinds of skin diseases, loss of teeth, and they used to wear masks for, because they were shy.
In addition to that, Rabbi Allen, in later times we had doctors would wear masks, right? In the Black Plague.
Right, that's right.
They would wear masks.
Yeah, COVID mask.
COVID mask. So you see, there's a lot of everything old is new again, and everything new becomes old. And so there we have. Anyways, we're going to talk about masks. That was the previous mission. We'll talk about it tomorrow or on Friday. But back to the nuts. Do they matter? So, Rabbi Allen, I just want to tell you one area where your explanation is great, but we haven't yet accounted for ancient medicine, and it's as follows. I believe what the madder plant, as you described, is probably taken as a tea or as a capsule or as a powder, right?
Could be any of them.
Here, it seems like they were being worn on their person for some kind of supposed to affect the person. And so
No, it says they take it by mouth.
Where are you looking?
I Googled it.
Oh, right. So it's taken by mouth. So let's see. What did you write? Madder remedies?
Madder plant. And I
Plants,
got remedies.
remedies or medicinal value. Despite serious safety concerns. So you're saying it's not necessarily so smart to take. No one here should take matter unless no one should take the matters into their own hands. They should seek a medical professional before taking matter. But there was value to it. It did stuff. The question is, how was it consumed? So it was mostly done orally, right?
Yeah. People take matter by mouth.
Interesting. So here they would have knots of matter. You think we're a how do you call it? A physics class talking all about matter over here. But anyways, okay. So Rav Yehuda says kishrei pua, it's a knot of garland. I'm sorry, garlands of matter. Amar Abaya taught as follows. So now let's see what the Gemara has to say. Amra li aim, Abaya said, my mother. Very interesting thing about Abaya. Abaya was an orphan. And he was raised by a nanny, it would appear, and under a number of times in the Gemara, Abaya would quote, the great Abaya of the Gemara would quote his nanny and different things he learned from her, or a foster mother, or an adoptive mother. So this is a not uncommon statement. Amra li aim. Mother, which is the adoptive mother who he was very close to, shared the following. Oh, I'm sorry. Tilasa mukmi. If you have 3 garlands of matter, that is enough to halt the progression of the illness that matter is meant to deal with. Rashi, it stops the progression but does not reverse the effects. Chamisha, 5 garlands of matter, masu, will heal. Rashi says, Mr. Apoyan, they heal you. Shiva, 7 is so effective. Afilu lichshafim malo, it can even be effective not only against regular illness, but even an illness that's triggered by sorcery, which is usually much harder to combat than typical garlands of matter. Rabbi Steinsaltz here has a note. Let's read. One commentary translates pua as a wig, which is similar to the word peya. That's the Meiri. However, other commentaries in the Talmud Yerushalmi make it clear that it's a plant. And again, Rabbi Steinsaltz chooses to translate it as a matter. All right, let's see the Gemara a little further. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Acha bar Yaakov says, matter could work in the garland form, but there are some conditions. It was never exposed to the sun or the moon. And it was never exposed to rain. And it also cannot hear the noise of the clanging of the smithies. The kol tarnagola, nor can it hear the sound of a rooster. The kol nigre, and the sound of Rabbi Steinsaltz's footsteps. Rashi, Psiyo's footsteps. So basically, matter could work, but there are many, many criteria. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, if that's the case, that there are so many criteria, nafal puta bebeira. This remedy is beyond accessibility. Rashi, nafal refuah sapua bebar, the ein adam nizar b'cholah. It is impossible. Where are you going to find a human being living in the ancient world that's going to be wearing a garland that will never be exposed to any of these things? The sun, the sky, rain, noise, rooster noise, footstep noise. You have to put a person in one of those isolation tanks and lock them in wearing these garland strands for who knows how long. It's practically impossible. If so many conditions exist, it basically doesn't exist. It's kind of like, sometimes you'll see an offer, a deal, a sale, and it sound or a deal on Groupon that sounds so good it's too good to be true, and then you buy it and you discover it only works at 11 if you go at 11:59 and 36 seconds on a Tuesday night, and you have to be the first person online, and basically it's impossible. It doesn't apply to anyone. And so that's what we're saying about this medicine. It basically can't really happen. So explains Rashi. All right, the Gemara now continues to ask on the wording of our Mishnah. My iryabanim are the illnesses that are improved by the matter plant only male, boy issues? What about girls? Rashi says, Rabbi Yehuda parech. If the question is according to Rabbi Yehuda, who translates that ksharim, the nuts, are actually matter plants, and it has a remedy. If that's the case, it should apply for boys and girls. And also, Ma'ir Yiktanim, why just minors? Afilu G'daylam Nami, it should also work for adults. And for that reason, the Gemara is going to change its, or give an alternative translation for the word ksharim. Elamai ksharim, one of these knots, a different thing, nothing to do with medicine. This is, the purpose was to do what Avin Barhuna taught, which is as follows. An ancient trick for home sickness or missing one's parent. Ben sheyesh lagagon al aviv, a child, a boy who's longing for his father. Noitel ritzua, his father is on a business trip. Maybe he was a soldier. He was in war. What do you do? Noitel ritzua mimino shel yamin. Take the strap of the right foot, the kosher leibasmala, and tie it on his left arm. And this was understood to help a child overcome the longing for the father. Rashi Gagun. Hold on, let's just do this. Is there a French word, bramors?
Not that I know of.
No.
All right. Not in modern French. All right. Anyways, a longing, a yearning. So there's a child who longs and yearns for his father, and he doesn't want to let his father eat. Or Rashi, if I'm reading Rashi correctly, it sounds like Rashi is describing some kind of attachment, or what's the word? Anyways, the kid will not leave his father's side. And he says, typically, there's a unique dynamic that exists between a girl and the father, a girl and the mother, a boy and the father, and the boy and the mother. And this was more prone in the ancient world to be something that would exist between a son and the father. And the reason being, in those days, it seems like children were mostly in the custody of the mother, talking about married couples, and boys mostly hung around their fathers. And so it's likely that there could be some kind of attachment between a son and the father, and therefore there needs to be a resolution or a remedy when the father has to go out to work and the kid doesn't want to let him go. So they had different tricks to help the kid overcome that. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, you want to remember how to help a child overcome this attachment to the father. Attachment is the wrong word, but this unwillingness to leave the father's side or to not get over the fact that the father is away at work. Simonach tefillin, it's kind of like tefillin. You tie it on your left hand. Shiyad yamina kasharta, the small ezel similar girsa. Chilufa sekanten, if you would swap and tie the left hand, on the right hand rather, that could be dangerous. It'll actually trigger greater longing for the father, and that would have an adverse effect. And because this could have even led to some kind of medical situation, the Chazal, the sages, allow these knots to be applied even on Shabbos. Let's see in the Shulchan Aruch. I'm curious if the Shulchan Aruch even brings this item down. I'll have to look it up later. Now that we're talking about remedies on Shabbos, Amar Avin Bar Huna, Amar Rav Chama Bar Goria, another type of remedy. Sachofe kosa atibure b'shabata. Rashi, kois sheyish behevel. Kigoin shiru memeno mayim chamen v'koif hu al atibur. Umisha chash b'meya. They used to take an empty cup that's still hot and a little moist from hot water, and they put it upside down on the abdomen. Lumisha chash b'meya. If a person has abdominal pain or stomach problems, and there would be a suction effect of the cup on the skin, and it was understood to help adjust or manipulate the innards in a way that would help the person find relief. Shaper Domi, this may be done on Shabbos. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz. Returning an empty cup was placed on the navel for healing. Now the question is, why is this considered a permissible healing? Isn't there a prohibition against medical remedy on Shabbos?
Not really.
Hmm?
Well, there is. There's certain refuah.
So why is this kind of refuah permissible? Let's see.
Totenbankis.
Sorry?
Totenbankis.
Bankis, isn't that a suction? Isn't that with leeches?
Right.
Bankis is leeches or just a suction?
Totenbankis.
No, bankers are the cups.
Oh, it's a cup, a kind of cup. Dr. Pasternak, in your medical career, have you ever used bankis or cups?
No.
No, that's not part of conventional medicine, is it?
No, it's not.
But in ancient medicine, it must have had a role to play, and I guess certain alternative. I think maybe
not so fast.
Red
There are
Barrel,
two ladies
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
who invented a thing for. There's two ladies that invented a thing which sells like crazy. If you get bitten, it's a little thing that you put on the bite, which sucks it out based on bankers, and it's successful, and it works.
Interesting. All right. In due time, we'll have to take a look at Shin Chavav in Shulchan Aruch, and we'll look at why this kind of healing is acceptable. Amar Rav and Barhuna, Amar Chamar Goria Motelasach Shemen Umelach b'Shabbos. You're also allowed to smear oil and salt on oneself on Shabbos. Kiyad Rav Huna Mimirav, as happened with Rav Huna Miberav Rav Miberav Chia, and also when Rav left the house of Rav Chia Miberava, Kihava Mivasmi, when they would be drunk. Interesting. Maisi Mishchol Milcha, they would have salt and oil, Vishaifu Lugavasayu, and they'd rub it on the palms of their hands, Vigvasai Dechrayu, and on their legs. The Amrin, they say, Kihechi Ditsayil, HaMishchol Leitzel Chamred Leplanya Bar Planya. Just like the oil is clear, so too you should be restored to a clear and lucid mind. You should have your mind clear of the effects of the alcohol. The Eloin, if that would not be effective, or if they didn't have it, Maisi Shia the Dona, they'd bring a special kind of a shmear, a sealing of clay, the tzayil, Hashia Litzachamre the Plani Barplani. They'd place a kind of clay that was used to seal barrels. They'd soak it in water. And they say, just like this clay is clear, so too you should restore clarity of mind. You should no longer be intoxicated. Interesting. Apparently it was the ritual hazing. Okay, it doesn't say that in Rashi, but apparently the students would be given what to drink. And they drink wine, and sometimes one could get a little shikar. And so this was a remedy that was known to help the person get back to normal, to become sober. And it was allowed to be done on Shabbos. Similarly, you're allowed to strangle on Shabbos. Strangle? Firstly, you're never allowed to strangle someone, and certainly on Shabbos, you shouldn't be allowed to do it. So, of course, we don't mean literally to strangle. We mean a kind of tightly applied bandage that would help when there was a pinched nerve or something uncomfortable in the neck, they would tie a tight something to help give the neck support and to help relief for the vertebrae that's being pinched, or that's pinching. You're allowed to swaddle a child tightly on Shabbos, even though this kind of swaddling was not just for comfort, it was meant to help keep and move, restore and align the limbs. This sounds like some kind of chiropractor practice, but it was allowed to be done on Shabbos. Period. Okay, so let me just remind you where we're coming from. Our Mishnah says children can go around with knots, and the Gemara asks, what are the knots? And so the first explanation was these knots are matter, which was a remedy. Then the Gemara asked, that can't be, because otherwise, why doesn't it also apply for girls and for adults? And so we gave another explanation. We're talking about knots that were used for a child that's homesick or misses the father, and it was a strap from the shoe that was applied on the left hand, and it would help them with this yearning. And you don't want to swap it, or you might actually exacerbate the yearning and the missing and the homesickness. And then we went on to talk about other remedies, which, to be clear, are not quite prevalent today in conventional medicine, as our physicians and pharmacists have informed us. Although maybe they're somewhat practiced yet. And so you have the remedy of bankis, an overturned cup, which there, I don't know if it was exactly the same purpose as bankis, but anyways, and I think there are some chiropractors that do this to this day and other alternate practitioners. Similarly, one would be allowed to put the oil and salt, which is supposed to help a person become clear, as we have some anecdotal evidence, and you're allowed to put something to help readjust the neck, and you're also allowed to do something that was to swaddle a child to help align the limbs, also in a seemingly chiropractic idea. There's another explanation or another version of our Mishnah or our teachings. Rav Papa Masni Badim. Rav Papa, when he read our Mishnah, would say that it was about children. Rav Zvid Masni Ben. Hold on. Let's read Rav Steinsaltz's explanation. There are two versions with regards to the halachis of Avin Bar Huna. What was Avin Bar Huna's halachis? About a child being swaddled. So there's a version that says banim, children, and one that says ben. That's it. Rav Papa taught two halachis about children in his name, and Rav Zvid taught one halacha about children in his name, the name of Rav Avin Bar Huna. The Gemara explains Rav Papa taught two halachis about children. He taught them the name of Rav Avin Bar Huna, which are the halacha about the knot and the halacha of the swaddling. Rav Zvid taught one halacha about a child, about the knots, and then the second teaching about the swaddling in the name of Rabbi Bar Huna, and about the swaddling of the child. Well, basically, there's some variations of who taught what to whom, just to show you what we're talking about here. If you notice, there were a series of medical traditions here. So you have Avin Bar Huna quoting Chama Bar Gurya. We have Avin Bar Huna quoting Rav Chama Bar Gurya again. We have Rav Huna, and we have here Avin Bar Huna in the name of Rav Chama Bar Gurya, and Avin Bar Huna in the name of Rav Chama. Okay. So Rav Papa taught these same teachings, but in the name of sometimes of different teachers. And that's what this whole segment is. I think we're going to pause over here. My dear friends, thank you for joining us. I meant to say this in the beginning, but I did not. So let me say so now, that we are dedicating our learning with schus, a miraculous healing for Boris Ben Chaya, a young man in the neighborhood that needs a refuah shlema, and also Lior Ben Sarah. Some good news. I want to thank all of the folks that join us today. You'll join us tomorrow, same time, same link. Yitz Hashem, Gesundheit and Freilich. Wonderful. Shkoyach to our medical and pharmacists and Talmidei Chachamim for helping us figure out today's Gemara. See, Mark, I was referring to you as the Talmud Chacham. We have our pharmacists and our doctors. Not to say that our pharmacists and doctors are not Talmidei Chachamim. All right, have a good day.